So I did restricting direct to physician marketing. So in this policy brief, the researchers in the article that was used difference and difference analysis to examine how the changes and restrictions on direct to physician pharmaceutical marketing included in the 85 academic medical centers conflict of interest policies has influenced opioid prescribing to Medicare Part D prescribers. In this difference analysis, the researchers compared prescribers at academic medical centers that did make changes by adding new restrictions in policy to the prescribers at the academic medical centers that made no changes in policy. And by not changing their policy, this means either the institution never had a restriction policy or that they always had one. Restrictions included meals or gifts that banned prescribers. This banned prescribers from receiving any sort of gift or meal, regardless of the value. Speaking and consulting engagements. This restriction prohibited prescribers from being paid by industry from promotional speaking or consulting relationships that were for marketing purposes. They also restricted industry representatives' access to the medical center. They were prohibited from accessing the academic facility at all. And then the last restriction was they required physicians to disclose conflict of interest with their employer. The results of the experiment suggested that on average, opioids were prescribed in 1,323 days during the study period, which the study period was over 3 years, from 2013 to 2016, and that generic opioids were prescribed much more often than brand name opioids, regardless of marketed or non-marketed. Each individual restriction on their own did not produce significant results, but the conclusion was that the results suggested that the presence of conflict of interest policies at the academic medical centers could reduce opioid prescribing. So the moral principles that I applied to this policy were beneficence, health maximization, and efficiency. So for beneficence is the intervention of any good to every single person taking part in this intervention. I said, since the act of receiving meals and gifts, etc., is an added bonus, restricting these will not do harm to them as a group. Putting multiple prescription restrictions in place at each academic medical center, as shown in the graph in the previous slide, or Exhibit 1, has significantly decreased opioid prescription. These restrictions will help the population ease off the gas of overprescribing opioids and ultimately help in the fight against opioid reliance. Is more benefit than harm produced by intervening or not intervening? How so? I said yes. According to the results of the analyses done by Eisenberg and his team, the reduction in opioid prescribing during the study period from academic medical centers that had multiple restrictions in place was evident. Although one of the limitations of the analysis was the knowledge of the clinical appropriateness of the prescribed opioid, opioids by nature are highly addictive, and when there are alternatives to these, the fewer prescribed, the better. So for my second moral principle of health maximization, is the proposed intervention effective and evidence-based? Does it improve population health? According to the article, by Eisenberg and his team, Exhibit 1 graph, there is a negative correlation with the amount of restrictions placed upon an academic medical facility and the amount of opioids prescribed by physicians, meaning there is evidence to suggest that a facility that has higher numbers of restrictions put in place, the less opioids that will be prescribed there. This helps to fight the current opioid epidemic by reducing the amount of opioids in circulation. Does it have a sustainable long-term effect on the public's health? Adding restrictions on direct-to-physician marketing has already shown through this research to decrease the overall prescriptions made for opioids in just 3 years that the study was going on. If the researchers expanded this to include non-opioid medications such as diabetic medication management medications, this could allow physicians to focus more on the root cause of the patient's issues rather than fill them with meds and send them on their way while receiving a kickback from the pharmaceutical industry. In the long term, we could see illnesses like diabetes, anxiety, depression, etc., being treated holistically rather than with medication, and therefore we as a society may be able to rely less heavily on the pharmaceutical industry. Is there a community added value to the proposed intervention? Medications are expensive and not always covered by insurance. Many people have to decide whether or not to pay for their medication or to pay for the rent, and therefore may go without their medication. Living in a world where the restrictions placed on direct-to-physician marketing help to decrease the overall medication that is needlessly prescribed and helping the community to focus on treating the root of the problem rather than use medications to ease these symptoms would lead to a healthier and overall happier community. So my last moral principle would be efficiency. Is the proposed intervention cost effective? So placing more restrictions on direct-to-physician marketing allows the physician to focus on the patient's past medical history and symptoms rather than the kickback he or she may receive from prescribing a certain medication that ultimately may or may not help. This way, the cost is reduced because the patient is being looked at holistically, and in the right treatment can be selected the first time. The patient becomes the center focus. Does the intervention demonstrate awareness of scarcity of public money so saved money can be used for other goods and services? Like I mentioned before, certain patients may have to choose between their costly meds and putting a roof over their head. Experimental medications and heavy hitter drugs such as opioids oftentimes are not covered under insurance companies, causing patients to pay out of pocket. Due to this issue, patients may end up going without life-saving medications due to the sheer burden of paying for them. Placing restrictions would lessen the draw to these new experimental drugs when a more cost-effective choice is available. And this page is for my references. Thank you.